It was near closing time. Lights low, music winding down. At a bar in West London, the final drinks were being poured. Nothing felt out of place. A few dozen people lingered near the walls and tables. Some are ready to head home, others still leaning into the night. Among them, a 21-year-old. He was relaxed and talking with friends. Then a man he didn't know walked straight over. What followed took less than 10 seconds. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, the man was already gone. This is the story of a young life that ended without warning, and how his killer became Britain's most wanted fugitive. Before we go on, I need your help. Leave a comment about the case or the way it's told. It helps this story reach more people. Josh Hanson was 21 years old. He lived with his mum in Kingsbury, northwest London, and worked as a roads planner for the local council. Known for being polite, hardworking, and close to his family, he was the kind of person who rarely went out looking for trouble. He loved his job, often started early, and was the type to make time for both his friends and his mum. His sister Brooke described him as thoughtful, someone who'd stop everything if you needed him. That Saturday night, he was doing what thousands of young people do every weekend. He was out with his girlfriend and a few mates. Nothing unusual, just a Saturday night, a quick drink, and plans for work. Shane O'Brien, on the other hand, moved in different circles. Born in West London, he was 27 at the time and already well known to police. He had links to organised crime and was considered part of a network that operated across Europe. People close to the case described him as careful, quiet, and well-resourced. Not flashy, but calculated. He had a daughter, kept his personal life guarded, and was known to frequent boxing gyms and nightclubs. Despite his background, he kept a low public profile. When he went out, he didn't attract attention. They didn't know each other, no connection, no shared history. Just two men in the same bar on the same night. What happened next was as fast as it was fatal. It was the early hours of Sunday, the 11th of October, 2015. The RE Bar in Eastcote, West London, was winding down for the night. Around 40 people remained, scattered across tables and the bar area. CCTV footage shows Josh Hanson arriving with his girlfriend and friends, standing near a wall inside the venue. Quiet conversation with friends. Across the room, seated with a group of his own, was Shane O'Brien, wearing his Canada Goose jacket. CCTV footage later confirmed the two men had no contact. They didn't speak. They didn't even glance at each other. O'Brien sat opposite, drinking with his group, blending in like anyone else. Staff and patrons later said nothing about him stood out. At around 1:10 a.m., O'Brien stood and made his way across the bar. He approached Josh directly, and the two exchanged brief words, something heated, though never fully detailed in any official account. The conversation lasted seconds. Then, mid-argument, O'Brien reached into the pocket of his Canada Goose jacket, pulled out a Stanley-style knife, and slashed Josh across the neck and chest, one swift motion. The blade carved a 37-centimeter wound, beginning just behind Josh's ear and cutting diagonally downwards. The entire attack took less than 10 seconds. People around them froze at the time. Many didn't realize what had happened until they saw the blood. An off-duty nurse ran over and tried to stop the bleeding, but Josh collapsed quickly. He was pronounced dead shortly after paramedics arrived. O'Brien didn't run. He didn't panic. He turned and walked out through the main door as calmly as he had entered. CCTV footage caught him leaving the bar, disappearing down Field End Road. Within minutes, the bar became a crime scene. Those 40 witnesses trying to piece together what they'd seen. No one had stopped him, and no one knew where he went. Shortly after, police arrived at the scene. The bar was sealed off and forensics moved in. Field End Road was cordoned off in both directions. Officers took statements from dozens of witnesses while the forensic team worked through the blood-stained floor shattered glasses, and CCTV footage. Within hours, detectives knew who they were looking for, but by then, Shane O'Brien was already gone. That's when the hunt began. In the hours after the murder, he didn't return to his home in Ladbroke Grove. Instead, he relied on a network, contacts well-versed in moving people and secrets. Over the next 2 days, he travelled from London to Kent. Investigators later discovered that he arrived at Biggin Hill Airport, a private airfield in southeast London. There, he boarded a privately chartered jet to the Netherlands. He used false documentation. The plane was booked under a fake identity. By the time police issued the first appeal, he was already across the channel. It was a clean exit, and a deeply organised one. This detail, a fugitive flying out of the country in a private aircraft, became one of the most heavily criticised elements of the case. From the Netherlands, his movements became harder to trace. Over the next few months, he dropped off the radar completely. He didn't use credit cards, he didn't check into hotels. Everything was cash, everything was hidden. To survive that long on the run, he clearly had serious help, but we'll get to that later. At this stage, he had slipped through the cracks. His face was on wanted posters, but no one could find him. For the police, the chase was now international. But for O'Brien, the run was just beginning. In the days after the murder, Shane O'Brien's name was added to Europol's most wanted list. British police, working with the National Crime Agency, pushed out appeals across Europe. They released updated images, circulated descriptions of his distinctive Canada Goose jacket, and initially offered £10,000, but later extended to £50,000 reward for information. But O'Brien had vanished. Detectives quickly learned he wasn't acting alone. He was being supported, financially and logistically, by organised criminal networks. Associates were providing him with safe houses, burner phones, and high-quality fake IDs. He didn't leave a trail. No bank cards or phones. Nothing traceable. Leads started to come in from across the continent. There were sightings in Germany, the Netherlands, and France. At one point, intelligence placed him in Dubai, where he was believed to be under the protection of serious organised crime contacts. But by the time local authorities followed up, he had moved again. Then came the break that nearly changed everything. In February 2017, Czech police arrested a man named Enzo Melancelli in Prague for criminal damage and assault. He had long hair, a beard, and a new back tattoo, a large owl clutching a skull designed to cover a previous mark. What Czech authorities didn't realize at the time, Melancelli was Shane O'Brien. They released him on bail, unaware they had briefly detained Britain's most wanted fugitive. His real identity was only uncovered weeks later when the images were matched and Interpol was notified. By then, he was gone again. More sightings followed, in Gibraltar, in Nice, in Prague once more. But O'Brien kept slipping through. He was careful, moved at night, stayed quiet, always a step ahead. The trail stayed warm, but never closed, until he made one mistake, and the arrest followed. While police worked across borders, Josh Hanson's family began their own search. With no justice and no answers, they refused to stay quiet. His mother, Tracy Hanson, became the driving force behind a nationwide and international campaign, not just to keep her son's name alive, but to make sure Shane O'Brien's face was seen by as many people as possible. She printed thousands of wanted posters, laminated them herself, and mailed them to supporters across the UK and abroad. She pushed O'Brien's image on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, updating followers and urging people to share. At every anniversary, she marked the date publicly, lighting candles, holding vigils, and speaking to press. 3 years after Josh's murder, she made headlines again. On what would have been his birthday, Tracy and Josh's sister Brooke completed a skydive to raise awareness. She also walked the streets of London wearing a sandwich board, not for fundraising, but simply to be seen. The board carried Josh's photo and details of the man who killed him. She stood outside train stations during rush hour, handing out flyers. Tracy later said she wasn't sure how else to get people to care. She said too many had forgotten or never heard his name at all. Alongside her efforts, the Met Police released regular updates. They added O'Brien to Interpol's red notice list and renewed public appeals. But each time they pushed, he seemed to slip further away. Behind the scenes, the family pressed for answers. They contacted the Met Commissioner, the National Crime Agency, and anyone they believed could help. Tracy questioned how someone could flee on a private jet and stay hidden for years, and how she was expected to grieve with no justice. She wasn't just grieving a son, she was chasing a fugitive, and she refused to stop. It was March 2019, nearly 3.5 years after Josh Hanson's murder, when Shane O'Brien finally slipped up. He'd spent the past few years moving through Europe under false identities, supported by a network that helped him vanish across borders. But this time, he made an error. In Romania, O'Brien had been using the alias Enzo Melancelli, the same name he'd used during his previous arrest in Prague. Video captured him walking along a normal street when suddenly, civilian-dressed Romanian officers appeared out of nowhere. They forced him to the ground, pinned him down, and arrested him in broad daylight. Witnesses later said he offered no resistance, handcuffed, and quickly bundled into a squad van. Romanian authorities worked closely with British counterparts and updated Interpol to confirm that Enzo Melancelli was indeed O'Brien. His distinctive owl and skull back tattoo, his altered appearance, and fingerprints all matched following the arrest. Extradition procedures began immediately. This time, there was no bail, no early release. He was held under armed guards, escorted onto a flight back to the UK, and landed at Heathrow in the early morning, where he appeared before a magistrate's court for the first time since re-entering Britain. For Josh's family, the news came quickly. After endless days of silence, appeals, and near misses, Shane O'Brien had finally been found. But the fight wasn't over. Now came the legal battle to bring him home. Shane O'Brien was flown back to the UK in April 2019. He appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court within hours of landing and was charged with the murder of Josh Hanson. The trial began later that year at the Old Bailey. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented clear CCTV footage showing the moment of the attack, from the way O'Brien approached Josh to the slashing motion and his calm exit. There was no dispute about who had done it. The focus was on motive and whether the killing was premeditated. O'Brien claimed it was a moment of madness, that he hadn't planned it. But the jury heard how he'd brought the knife into the bar, how he had no known relationship with Josh, and how he'd fled the country just hours after the murder, using fake documents and criminal contacts. Prosecutors described it as an unprovoked and calculated killing, carried out in public, in a room full of witnesses, with no hesitation. The court also heard how O'Brien had spent years hiding under false names, changing his appearance and relying on an international network to stay hidden. He had support, he had resources, and he showed no signs of giving himself up. After a short deliberation, the jury found him guilty of murder. In October 2019, Shane O'Brien was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. The judge described the attack as grotesque and savage, and O'Brien had shown no remorse. For Josh Hanson's family, it was the justice they had waited more than 4 years to see. The man who took Josh's life in under 10 seconds would now spend decades behind bars. What do you make of the sentence? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want more real UK crime stories told like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case to uncover.